Okay, now some of you asked questions before the seminar started and you emailed them to me, and some came in through the survey, and there are some great questions here. So I'm going to start with these, and I'll get to all the questions that you're asking as we go along. I'm going to start with the ones that came in earlier. First of all, the question is funny meant for all day, or is this just mostly for morning shows? Well, there's a lot of variables in that question, or in the answer to that question. The first response I have to that is that listeners are coming to the radio for companionship, to be made to feel good, to put a smile on their face, and to laugh. And as time goes on, I think stations that live just by a music format, whether that's in the morning or after 10 o'clock in the morning, are going to be in a lot of trouble. And we have to provide other reasons for them to become fans of our station, become fans of our shows, become fans of our personalities. So I believe it applies to everybody. Now, it might apply differently depending on your format, depending upon your station goal, depending upon what your company will allow you to do, depending on what time of day you're on, depending upon the audience expectation. There's so many things that go into that. But I think that personalities should have a sense of humor and should learn to be funny no matter what time of day they're on or how long they're on. And I think you can apply these principles in any type of restriction. Maybe you're just a personality that's on a music format and you've got 30 seconds to talk into stop sets and you're talking over intros the rest of the time. You can still apply these concepts in different ways in shorter periods to be funny. And you know what? A funny thing happens, ironic, a funny thing happens when you're regularly funny. You end up having more time to talk because you earn that with the audience. The next question is, are comedy sketches and characters a good idea? They can be, but they're not for everybody. Look, there's a lot of different ways to be funny. I just wrote a personality profile this week on Jumpin' Jeff in Scranton Wilkes-Barre. Jeff has been there for 40 years, just celebrated his 40th anniversary. I published the article yesterday at tjohnsonmediagroup.com. And Jeff does parody songs, and he does parody commercials, and he does skits, and he's a great writer. That's where he gets his humor. That's his funny. And so it works for Jeff, but that doesn't work for everybody. If you're great at doing parody songs, do parody songs. If you're not great at it, don't. If you can do observational humor and if you can inject funny into your personality in whatever platform you have, find what's funny for you, find what works for you, and be great at those things. How do I get the most fun from a one-person morning show? Well, this is a great question, but as you listen, go back to the Louis C.K. segment that I played for you about Monopoly. He was a solo performer. Just because you're on by yourself is not a reason not to be funny. You can be funny as a solo performer. You don't have to have partners to apply these principles and these ideas. Maybe it's easier. Maybe it's a shortcut, but funny is funny, and you can learn how to do that. So apply these principles and do it in baby steps. Besides bouncing off callers, how can a one-person morning show be funny? So a similar question and a similar answer. Don't depend on callers for a sense of humor. If you have a caller that has a great response to something and can give you something to respond to that is funny, then that's a bonus. That's terrific. But don't count on callers to drive it for you. Next question. Comedians are always pushing the envelope, but they find where the line is based on audience reaction, and people expect it. Offending 500 people in a comedy club isn't nearly as risky as offending a city full of listeners. How do you find the fine line? Do you play it safe? Does it depend on format? And how do you recover after pushing things too far? Wow, this is loaded. I could do a whole seminar on this, but I'll give you the short response to it. You have to know who your audience is, and you have to know what the audience's values are, and be careful to not offend them, but don't be afraid to step on their toes. And if you're finding the things with your audience that is relatable, and you make them feel a little bit uncomfortable, and then you provide that relief in the surprise, that can all work. And that can all work for you. The other thing is you have to know who you are on the air and what the audience expects from you. Do they expect you to be sarcastic and cynical, or do they expect you to be family friendly and a warm, nurturing personality? What's your character profile? So if you're funny within your character profile, you're not going to offend your audience. Now, if you think about the great characters that you might be familiar with on sitcoms, think about Sheldon on Big Bang Theory. Sheldon is the guy who always thinks that he's the smartest guy in the room, largely because he is. And that's the root of his comedy. That's his comic perspective. That's where his humor comes from. But there's other characters on that show that are very different. Leonard's a very different character than Sheldon is, and his funny lines come from a place of insecurity. Leonard's always insecure, and he's got issues that go all the way back to when he was a small child. So he's funny through his comic perspective in a different way. And you as a personality need your own personality profile. You need a character profile so you know who you are on the air, and that's where you're going to find what's funny. And as long as you're performing within that character profile, then you haven't gone too far. Sheldon goes too far for some people in the audience with some of the things that he says on Big Bang Theory. It makes people uncomfortable. It makes you crazy about him. It's maddening, some of the things that he says. But there's also humanity in his character profile. So it's not just about how can I offend the most people? Will that be funny? And hopefully more people will find this funny than are offended. That's not it at all. Humor and your personality and your funny on the air, how you find your funny, has to be done within the context of who you are. Chris Rock doesn't do the same set as Louis C.K. Dave Barry doesn't do the same jokes as Woody Allen. Steve Martin doesn't do the same jokes as Eddie Murphy. They all channel it through their personality, through their character, and radio personalities have to do exactly the same thing. Overkill, hammering a point so hard that there's no element of surprise. Like saying, hey, are you paying attention because this is funny? What do you think of that? Well, look, there's a element of funny of saying the same joke over and over and having those recalls that the more you say it, the funnier it gets. And then there's a point of no return where, okay, this isn't so funny anymore. I think you've got to develop a sense of timing. You've got to develop a sense for when it's when it goes too far. Are there some topics that have been done so often that they are best left alone unless you have a truly innovative take on them? Things like the difference between men and women. What's up with this personality? I wish I could find an easy way to get rich. My spouse and I always fight over this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I think there's some universal concepts. Sitcom writers will tell you that there's only about 50 plot lines for every sitcom episode that's ever been written. What makes each of those episodes different are the personalities and the characters that are performing it. And so they put their humor through the character profile and through the comic perspective rather than just making jokes about the situation. And that's how those episodes come out different. So I think if you are looking at what's relatable to your audience and you start there, and then there's a lot of different ways to entertain based on that through the props. I was on a call this morning with one of my stations who was talking about doing a relationship segment here in a couple of days. And I said, well, okay, that's great. It's a really great segment. It's very relatable. Is there a way we can also make it relevant? And he said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, if Tampa Bay wins the Game 6 of the World Series tonight, then tomorrow's Game 7. And so what if you set this up tomorrow? And if there is a Game 7, then you could go back to the classic argument. If she wants to do this, he wants to do that. But now you can put it in the context of he was planning to do this with her until there's a Game 7 of the World Series. And now everything's off because he wants to stay home and watch TV instead. It's the same setup, what men versus women, different perspective there, but we're putting it into a different context by putting different props around it. And I think it'll make it not only relatable, because the topic itself is relatable, you can see yourself there, but it also now becomes relevant. So yeah, I think there's a limited number of topics, but there are an unlimited number of circumstances that make those topics come alive. So don't be afraid about doing the same type of themes over and over. Next question is, what are some universal themes that are funny? Related to that, can family-friendly funny be done, or does it always have to be edgy and cheesy? I think I've kind of answered that in a lot of different ways. Universal themes for funny are, things that are relatable, things that the audience can see themselves in. That's the background. That's the essence. That's the root of where your humor comes from. If I can't relate to it, if I can't see where you're coming from in the story that you're telling, then I'm probably not going to think it's funny when you give me the twist at the end. Funny is subjective. How about a couple of examples of making the same topic funnier for two different audiences? I talked about that too. And if we thought about that long enough, we could probably come up with a topic, and we could workshop this and come up with the same story and the same topic, completely different treatment to it for two different formats or two different types of audiences, and equally funny depending on who it is. But look, funny doesn't depend on having to be family friendly. If you watch old episodes of Leave It to Beaver or the Andy Griffith Show, and I'm dating myself here, but the Brady Bunch, Cheers, MASH, Friends, Seinfeld, really not edgy. They're very family friendly. They're universal. And they're genuinely, uniquely funny. But you can also watch some of the edgier stand-up comics today that are very edgy and also funny. So funny happens when you find the relatable thing in the audience, you exaggerate it, you build expectation for it, and you have a surprise at the end. So very well thought out. And one more that came in advance: what type of humor is the best to develop on the air? Satire, scathing humor, ironic humor, whatever you're good at, whatever you're funny at is going to be the best type of humor for you. Okay, so those are the questions that came in advance. Now I'm going to breeze through the chat room and the question and answers, and I'll get to those. And again, if you have some more that you want to ask as we go along here, you can still type in your questions. I will stay answering questions about this presentation or anything else about personality radio as long as you're asking the questions. Okay, Don says, I'm doing afternoon drive and we're music intensive. How can I be funnier when time is limited? And we talked about that. And next comment from Don is, okay, you answered my question. Thank you. Jeremiah says, refreshing to hear the words laugh when it's appropriate. I had a PD who once told us never to laugh on your show on the air. It's the audience's job. That advice never sat well with me. We're all in the moment together, right? Absolutely. Let yourself express emotion. It's a natural emotion. And again, turn up the volume on it just a little bit. You don't turn it from a 1 to a 4, but turn it from a 1 to a 2. Turn it from a 2 to a 3. Don't be afraid to laugh. Question from Blair. Hey, Blair, good to hear from you about the pandemic. The pandemic's going on. How well do virtual improv classes work? I haven't been on a virtual improv class, but I think they're working really well. My son does improv. And he was in the second year of doing improv classes when the pandemic hit, and they put everything on pause for a while, and they started it up again over the summer, and he loves it. He was really enjoying the virtual improv, and now they've started meeting outdoors in a park at night and maintaining social distance. And he said it's giving them a whole different way to perform and a whole different way of looking at humor and setting those scenes. So I think that can be really valuable. But I haven't been on a virtual improv class myself, but I would certainly take a look at that. Chuck asks about the author of The Storyteller's Secret. Oh, man, I should know that off the top of my head, but I don't. If you look that up, here it is. It's Carmine Gallo. Carmine Gallo, Carmine Gallo, like the wine. The Storyteller's Secret. It's a good book. I highly recommend. I don't recommend it as much as Long Story Short. Long Story Short is a great book for radio personalities. There's a lot of things in there that you'll go, oh, that's me. I get that. Storyteller's Secret is also good, and there's some good things that will come out of there. But I think if you're going to get one or the other, get Long Story Short. Let's see. A lot of nice comments. Thank you. I appreciate all that very much. Question: when you suggest when you don't laugh, what do you suggest when you don't laugh and the host takes it personal? Jessica, that's a great question. There's a difference in what happens in real life and what happens on the air. First of all, every personality should learn not to take anything that happens on the air personally. This is showbiz. It's not real life. And we're doing things for an effect on the audience, not to, it's not a real relationship, in other words. It's based on a real relationship, but it's not a real relationship. And it sounds like, and I'm reading some things into this, it sounds like you may need to have a conversation about focusing on the audience and focusing on the performance and how performance on the air is different than real life. And if the host thinks that they're funny and they're not, and it's really not funny and you're not laughing, then maybe you should have a conversation about how to be funnier. And I don't know the situation. I don't know the personalities that you're talking about. I don't know the details behind it. So I don't want to read too much into that, but it sounds like there's probably some coaching that might need to take place there. And that can be really hard to do through personalities that are working together every day. I would get the program director involved, your consultant involved, your talent coach involved, if you have those resources. If not, reach out to me if you want. I would be glad to do a project with you and kind of talk you through this. Neil says, can you tell us about a couple of radio personalities you find consistently funny? Yeah, Brian Moot is really funny. Brian is a stand-up comic as a background. Brian's on in Dallas on The Wolf country station in Dallas. Brian is naturally and regularly funny. I haven't heard his show since he's been on The Wolf, but I worked with him when he was on the Burt Show in Atlanta and when he was on in Seattle before that. And he's the guy who does Tough Love with Alexa and Siri in the syndication that I'm involved with. I mentioned the Burt Show. Yeah, the Burt Show is a funny show. I don't think the personalities on the show are that funny. It's a great example of funny things happening. And Burt is a master of making funny things happen on the show. And some of it, it's more a situation of what happens on the show than anything individually that the hosts on the show say. There's another person, Jeff Dowler, who used to be on the Burt Show. And I'm talking about the Burt Show a lot. Burt's a great scout for talent. Jeff Dollar used to be on the Burt Show, and I worked with him there and also on Star in Atlanta. And he's not on the radio anymore, but he's doing a podcast with his wife. And one of the funniest, naturally funny people you're ever going to be around. Really, really funny in a cynical and sarcastic sense of humor, cynical and sarcastic type of way. Free Beer and Hot Wings, probably the funniest radio show I know. They are genuinely funny. They are laugh out loud funny. It takes a lot to make me laugh out loud when I'm listening to radio because I listen to so much. Hardly a day goes by when I listen to them where I don't laugh out loud at something that they've done. Free Beer and Hot Wings are awesome. Dee Dee in the Morning in Dallas, I've been working with for a long time. Funny, funny show. Again, funny things happen, but they're also funny people. So there's a handful. Brad says, when you're working with a team show, when rehearsing the bit, should the punchlines be rehearsed as well? Do you want the reactor to know the punchline before it is delivered? Here's my very thoughtful answer to that, Brad. It depends. I'm working with a show right now that is really great at rehearsing, and when they perform it, they sound like it's the first time they've heard it. They are fabulous at it. And the co-host on the show has told me I am a master. The more I hear something, the more spontaneous I sound when it comes time to perform it. So it depends on the personality. Some people, you need that natural response. I've worked with some shows where it's better if some members of the show never come to a show prep planning session, because when they hear it for the first time, their natural response is better. And in fact, in some cases, I've said, don't let her ever come to the show prep meetings again, because when she knows what's going on, she gets bored and she doesn't react well. But when she hears it for the first time, her personality just exploded. So it depends. There's other personalities who are natural off the top. The key, though, is that you don't just sit back and expect something funny to happen and use that as an excuse not to do show prep. So I think that on a team show, everybody on the show should know what the segment's about. They should know, the direction that the segment is going, but not necessarily know the punchlines. But again, there's a lot of variables to that, and it all depends on what works best for the individual personalities.